I'm here with Dr. Amar Bhidé, the Thomas Schmidt-Heine Professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He's written a new book put out by Oxford University Press entitled A Call for Judgment. Amar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Your book has created quite a stir, which I congratulate you for.
Thank you.
This is a very tumultuous time in the world economy, and people are rethinking things from the foundation, and you seem to have touched a nerve. I know there are 3 chapters in the book that really go to the heart of economic and financial theory and what you have described to me in other conversations as the fundamental uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Describe a little bit of how this uncertainty affects the judgment of financiers and why you think things are a bit off course.
We live in a pervasively dynamic world. So we live in a world where all of us, or most of us, are engaged in trying to do something new or trying to respond to something new that has happened, that somebody else has done. And so whatever has happened in the past is an imperfect guide to what will happen in the future. So we are constantly engaged in making judgments, not on a statistical basis looking at time series data, but perhaps looking at some of this time series data but trying to imagine what is going to happen in the future. In doing so, we face risks, but rarely do we reduce these risks to a quantifiable number. I mean, we take risks day in and day out, sort of take a risk on what I'm going to wear this morning, what you're going to order at a restaurant. And I'd say that virtually none of us ever thinks of these risks as a probabilistic estimate. And to the degree that finance responds to risk-taking by individuals, to the judgments of individuals, finance too ought to be making these kinds of forward-looking, non-probabilistic judgments. That doesn't mean that finance ought not to be looking at numbers. I'm not arguing for innumeracy. But that financial judgments ought to be made in this Hayekian way, where you look at all the possible facts, all the possible numbers, and figure out what is going to happen in the future. This is what finance ought to be like. What we've seen in finance theory, however, are a series of assumptions which do exactly the opposite. Finance theory is built on the assumption that all or most risks can be reduced to a number, to a probability estimate. Yes, we grant that there will be occasional pieces of radical uncertainty, but these are things which happen on the margin rather than happen day in and day out. We further assume either that there are omniscient beings who know what this probability distribution is, or if we don't assume that there are omniscient beings, we assume that everybody has the same probability estimate. Now, of course, the world doesn't have omniscient beings, and then when we try to put this finance theory into practice, there is no omniscient person we can go to and say, what's the probability distribution? So then we engage in a third fudge, and the third fudge is that the future is going to be like the past. So if we knew what the probability distribution of prices was in the last 2 years, we assume that that's what's going to be the probability distribution in the next 2 years. And that is fundamentally wrong. So I argue that we should get rid of these assumptions once and for root and branch, and we should go back to a case-by-case view of finance. But that's an inconvenient way of doing things. What modern finance theory allows us to do, even if it is fundamentally at odds with the way the world works, is it allows us to mass produce financial instruments. It allows us to go from $100 trillion in over-the-counter derivatives in 2000 to 600 or 800 trillion in 2006 by assuming that no judgment need be exercised. That we can throw in historic data into this model and we will know what the right price is. It allows us to assume that the CEOs of these mega financial institutions need not know anything about what the individual financier is doing,
simply by having the right model for risk. And whenever things go wrong, people say, "Oh, the model was wrong." Would assume that things would be uncorrelated when they were in fact correlated. But it's not that the parameters of the model that were wrong. It was the very use of that kind of model to control risk which was the defect. And this defect goes back to the way modern finance has been constructed, going back to the Miller-Modigliani theorems. It is inherent in the capital asset pricing model. It is inherent in the Markowitz view of risk, and it's certainly central to the way Black-Scholes-Merton is constructed.